Мы должны дойти до конца, до победы.
Welcome to WatchMojo, and for this list we'll be looking at some of the largest and most sociopolitically consequential insurgencies throughout the world since the year 2000.
As he shot him, or a civilian, we will shoot him.
Taliban Insurgency, Afghanistan.
ستونزه دا چې اوس موږ ډیر وایلو کې ډیر نوی راغلو دغه کلیک ستونزه وا په دوه باندې بوخت ان شاء الله دوام به نه کوي ورو په ټول وضعیت سم شي.
The Islamic Emirate of Afghanistan was established in 1996 with most of the country governed by the theocratic Taliban regime. Following 9/11 5 years later, U.S. forces that once supported the regime's leaders against Soviet invasion overthrew them. This gave the Americans a stronghold in the controversial War on Terror.
It has raised concern over how Afghan security forces will cope with an intensifying insurgency once most foreign combat troops leave the country by the end of 2014.
Meanwhile, the exiled Taliban launched an armed revolt seeking the expulsion of Western forces overseeing the secularization of the Islamic Republic of Afghanistan. This sparked nearly 20 years of heated discourse and violence over the ideological future of a society that has long endured some form of occupation. In 2021, American troops withdrew, and the emirate was quickly reinstated in a Taliban uprising. Several militias now fight to resist their return to power. The Second Chechen War, Chechnya.
Весь этот режим установлен с одной единственной целью для того, чтобы как можно крепче сидеть во власти.
Centuries of conflict between Russia and the North Caucasus region naturally escalated after the USSR's dissolution in 1991. The most brutal battleground was Chechnya. 3 years after a war decided Russian Federation sovereignty, Islamist rebels from autonomous Ichkeria demanded full independence. When Russia responded by occupying the state in 2000, the Second Chechen War became an insurgency.
Вот я, а это вот командир батальона Серегин. Ну это вот в таких условиях мы жили.
Guerrilla fighters' gruesome nationalist revolutions spilled over throughout Eastern Europe. Russian Prime Minister Vladimir Putin's counter-terrorism campaign was integral to his ascension to the presidency. Russia ultimately reclaimed dominion in 2009, though it would be another turbulent 8 years before the end of the conflict with Chechnya was proclaimed. Conflict had been going on since 1785. For many within and beyond the republic, however, the fight for independence continues.
The rebels have sworn to fight a partisan war. There's little, it seems, the Russians can do to stop them.
Niger Delta conflict, Nigeria.
What you see here is just a means of survival. We are fighting to eat.
The minority citizens of Nigeria's Niger Delta became incensed by the growing presence of foreign oil companies in the 1990s. In 2003, they took action. Multiple militant groups rebelled against the recently democratized government for protection and economic control of the environment. Violence rapidly spread throughout the region and included acts of piracy against the oil industry. This contributed to national energy crises. The Nigerian government has responded with security engagements and protection for victims of the conflict.
They are poor and their livelihoods have been destroyed, their farmlands are gone, the water is gone. And tell me, how could they possibly survive?
But they've rarely addressed the rebels' cause. Since negotiations broke down in 2016, the conflict has expanded into demands for Biafran separatism. Despite being destabilized by rampant internal conflicts and civilian casualties, rebellion through the Niger Delta is as strong as ever.
The smoke, the heat, he says. I cannot count the number of people who have died in explosions because they cannot escape the flame.
Iraqi insurgency, Iraq.
Right in the middle of Baghdad, Zarqawi's black flags line the streets. His fighters everywhere.
The brutal reign of President Saddam Hussein came to an end with an American invasion in 2003. In the war for Iraq's resources and political transition, nationalist groups violently rebelled against American occupation. By 2006, an insurgency against the reconstituted government splintered over Shia and Sunni ideologies. This civil war made Iraq one of the most chaotic countries in the world even after occupation ended in 2011.
I keep on thinking in terms of Shakespearean tragedy, and I think we're probably only in Act 4 right now. Act 5, the bloody conclusion of Hamlet or Macbeth, still has not happened.
The U.S.'s military actions have since been widely condemned as poorly formulated and illegal, leaving Iraq in an unstable democracy. Controversial elections have led to violently suppressed protests, and a war with the Islamic State has spawned Islamist insurgencies throughout the country. Democracy in Iraq continues to be endangered by civil unrest and political corruption. War in Darfur, Sudan.
We're fighting for our freedoms. We want our freedoms. We want our motherlands.
Against 20 years of civil war in Sudan's southern region, two militias in Darfur united against the marginalization of non-Arab citizens. President Omar al-Bashir responded by supporting Arab militias' ethnic cleansing campaigns. The ensuing violence inspired uprisings throughout the country and drew international condemnation of the Sudanese government. It was under this pressure that one of the longest recorded civil wars ended with the secession of South Sudan. Meanwhile, Darfur's governance continued to be divided by revolution, genocide, and failed peace negotiations.
Heute gehen die Angriffe am Boden weiter. Die Bombardierungen hat man eingestellt. Der Konflikt wurde zu einem nicht enden wollenden Stellungskrieg.
Finally, in 2018, much of the country rose up in nonviolent protests. This Sudanese revolution set the stage for Bashir's deposition and trial in the International Criminal Court. After years of historic bloodshed, Sudan finally began its transition to democracy in 2020.
The government deceived us. They made us flee from our lands. We knew with time that they have no principles.
Arab Spring, Middle East and North Africa.
The scenes here are absolutely amazing. Just when you thought that they couldn't possibly fit another body onto Tahrir Square, well, crowds and crowds are coming in by the thousands to join in.
Historic political instabilities throughout the Arab world culminated in the winter of 2010. The Arab Spring ceremoniously began with a Tunisian street vendor's self-immolation to protest his government's corruption and economic mismanagement. The responding Jasmine Revolution inspired reformist protests in more than a dozen countries throughout North Africa and the Middle East. The leaders of Tunisia, Libya, Egypt, and Yemen were deposed within a year, and debates between secularist and Islamist regime changes often turned to violence.
The mobile phone footage was shown on the internet. It was broadcast on Al Jazeera. By then, Tunisia was on fire itself.
Though the mass unrest was officially suppressed by the end of 2012, it was only considered the first Arab Spring. Many of its legacies of unstable systems and civil war remain. Many still consider the two-year phenomenon to be the largest revolution in the 21st century so far.
There was a sense of hope that they would bring about change. There was also a sense of determination that actually, if they had to die doing it, they were prepared to die doing it. I was quite staggered by that.
Green Movement, Iran. In 2009, Iran's populist president Mahmoud Ahmadinejad narrowly won re-election against reformist Mir Hossein Mousavi. Questions about the election's legitimacy soon inspired nationwide protests for its annulment. Mousavi's campaign color green became a symbol of unity among all reform activists. After violent episodes allowed authorities to suppress public demonstrations, the Green Movement adopted more modern methods. Social media activism became so widespread that the movement was nicknamed the Twitter Revolution.
It's likely that with a Mousavi presidency, the response to President Obama's overtures to Iran would be more positive than it has been to date.
This gave protesters a platform that local and international media outlets fell short on. Its scale and effectiveness were still subject to debate, especially with the government's internet regulation. The Green Movement was ultimately unsuccessful, but impacted the nation as its largest protest since the Iranian Revolution. It would be Ahmadinejad's last term as president. Kitchenware Revolution, Iceland. The 2008 global financial crisis forced Iceland's three leading banks to default. With the stock market plummeting and unemployment soaring, the government nationalized the banks responsible. This sparked the largest protest in the country's history, symbolized by protesters banging kitchenware outside of the parliament in Reykjavik.
There were huge daily protests then, too. It was called the Pots and Pans Revolution. The entire economy was in freefall.
Their outrage eventually triggered an emergency election that removed the Independence Party from power. The new government then introduced a referendum in which over 90% of voters decided that taxpayers shouldn't be responsible for the bank's debts. Citizens were also invited to draft a new constitution. These reforms were ultimately not adopted, but the prospect represented a watershed moment in modern democracy. In a time of global crisis, the people of Iceland determined their direction forward.
People were angry, so you had to come up with some kind of political solution.
Orange Revolution, Ukraine.
They saw that the majority of protesters were young people who can express their thoughts intelligently, and it assured them that there were no bandits here.
As the Russian Federation began to expand by the turn of the 21st century, former Soviet states saw a rise in movements to preserve democratic sovereignty. These so-called color revolutions included the Orange Revolution in Ukraine. After the pro-Russian Viktor Yanukovych won the 2004 presidential election,
if they shoot us, if they send tanks, no matter what, there's nothing that can
overpower the will of the people.
Evidence of fraud led to widespread civil disobedience. Thousands of protesters in Kyiv alone prompted the Supreme Court to investigate the legitimacy of Yanukovych's election. He was ultimately removed from office in favor of pro-Europe opponent Viktor Yushchenko. It was a victory for peaceful anti-corruption protests, but Yanukovych was eventually elected president in 2010. Corruption and Russian alignment policies throughout his term culminated in the violent Euromaidan protests of 2014. Ukraine has been at war with Russia ever since.
Мы понимали прекрасно, что наши оппоненты пойдут на крайний инструмент. Там нет запретов на использование любых методик.
Before we continue, be sure to subscribe to our channel and ring the bell to get notified about our latest videos. You have the option to be notified for occasional videos or all of them. If you're on your phone, make sure you go into your settings and switch on notifications. People's April Revolution. Kyrgyzstan. The history of Kyrgyzstan has been haunted by unrest over inter-ethnic and economic tensions. They continue to escalate after the Tulip Revolution overturned the controversial parliamentary election of 2005. President Kurmanbek Bakiyev's own authoritarian tendencies inspired a number of protests calling for his resignation. As he fled in April 2010, Kyrgyzstan fell to chaos. Ethnic clashes displaced hundreds of thousands, with many Uzbek citizens being forced to leave the country. Finally, a referendum in June led to constitutional amendments limiting presidential powers. The People's April Revolution is now commemorated with a national holiday. For many, it's more of an especially solemn chapter of unrest for the Kyrgyz Republic.
Kyrgyzstan's president has reportedly fled to his power base in the south of the country. For now, the border with neighboring Kazakhstan is closed, and so is the airport in the Kyrgyz capital.
Following violent protests of the 2020 election, another referendum restored the presidential system. What are some other revolutionary conflicts that you feel deserve more attention? Join the discourse in the comments. Check out these other clips from WatchMojo, and be sure to subscribe and ring the bell to be notified about our latest videos.